Welcome, everyone, to our panel on a global perspective on the work of the future. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. My name is Jason Jackson. I'm Ford Career Development Assistant Professor of Political Economy at MIT. And today's panel addresses the questions that we've been discussing all morning in a global perspective. The topic of the panel is the following. While new technologies related to AI and advanced automation are being developed and deployed globally, the implications for workers significantly varies across countries and jurisdictions. So a lot of the discussion that we've had so far this morning has really centered on the ways in which new technologies have impacted workers in the United States, with references at various points in time to experience outside of the US context. The goal of this panel is to really think about how the work of the future is emerging in different countries and what the major themes, concerns are that we see popping up in different jurisdictions. And then finally and crucially, how institutions and policies that are being put in place, as well as strategies that firms are adopting, are addressing these issues around the world. To help me discuss these issues, we have three excellent panelists. I'm very excited. First, we have Volkmar, who's chairman of the board at Robert Bosch GmbH. Bosch, of course, a leading manufacturing firm in Germany. We have Yasheng Huang, a professor of global economics and management at MIT Sloan, my colleague across campus. And we have Indra Nooyi, who is former chair and CEO of Pepsico. So we have an excellent group of panelists to really help us think through these issues. So I'm really excited for us to dive right in. So my first question goes to Volkmar. Volkmar, our societies are facing a range of challenges: wage and wealth inequality, xenophobia and systemic racism, climate change, and of course, most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic. All of these issues have pointed to a number of social inequalities in our societies. Within the context of thinking about the emergence of AI and advanced automation, what challenges do these new technologies pose to society? And crucially, what types of technologies do you think we should be developing in order to have the type of society that we want?
Thanks a lot, Jason. I'm honored to be part of this discussion and of this panel. Well, I think in answering your questions, first of all, we have to look at the challenges that societies face. And I think technology and innovation always has to be the tool, the method to improve or to answer these challenges. And for me, there is one summary saying that technology always should serve human beings and societies and not vice versa. And regarding the constraints that we face, both in leading a company as a CEO or being part of a society, for me is always the same. For me, it's balancing what I call a triangle. And this triangle consists of economical, ecological, and social aspects. And the difficult part is how to keep this triangle in balance. Just to give you an example, Bosch was the first company a couple of years ago to develop a collaborative robot for manufacturing. So a robot with a sensor skin preventing that it hurts human beings. So it was allowed and officially released to be able to work among human beings in a manufacturing line. Now, when you design such a robot, you can go two basic paths, I would say. First of all, you can go a very aggressive path and saying the robot finally could replace human workers. The path we chose was completely different. Our setup and also the target for the engineers was that your target is to make human beings, human workers in the line even more valuable. And I'm really proud that this worked out, because when I visited one of our factories where this robot had to be removed for maintenance reasons, the worker asked his colleague, his human colleague, "Where is my colleague?" And he meant the robot. And this for me showed that the concept worked. Of course, there will be some tasks in the manufacturing line that will be obsolete by using a robot. But what I wanted to bring over, it's if you design the concept in such a way, my experience is we will find a balance between the economical aspect, introducing automation, and also the social aspects, keeping workers in work and not replacing them.
Thank you so much, Volkmar. And this is such a crucial perspective for us to have, because much of the issue of the emergence of AI and advanced automation has been posed as a tension between either going with robots on one hand or human workers on the other. And certainly one of the things that the task force report has sought to highlight is precisely this point, that there is a middle road. There are ways in which new technologies can be developed to complement human workers. And the example you just gave of work that you're doing at Bosch sort of fits with this perfectly. So thanks very much. I'm turning to Indra and sort of building on this question of the sort of challenges that technology poses to society. What constraints do CEOs face when considering the societal implications of new technology creation and deployment? Do CEOs have sort of free rein to pursue approaches that might be societally beneficial? Or are there constraints that CEOs face in their role as heads of their organization?
Jason, thanks for the question. And I thought the report itself was brilliantly written. I mean, it's very detailed. It's got a lot of substance in it, and now we have to act on it. Let me frame your question slightly differently. You know, CEOs run companies that are embedded in society. If society doesn't succeed, companies are not going to succeed. And so let's talk about, I mean, in fact, let me twist your question a bit and say, what type of a society do we want? I mean, the report has highlighted several things. One, it said that inequality has become almost unmanageable right now. The deviation between the rich and the not so rich is the highest it's ever been. Is that the kind of society we want? There's a comment which said that the American dream is fraying. Do we want the American dream to fray at the edges? I don't think so. Do we just keep recommending things? And these recommendations have come about for the last decade or so without doing anything about it. Governments cannot do everything themselves. Governments have got other problems. So companies have to come together with governments and societies and communities and address all of them together. So I think that technological progress is going to continue. I don't think you can put a straitjacket on that and say, stop, don't grow, because that's competitive. That's going to keep growing. At the same time, I think we've got to have a very clear idea of what kind of a society do we want, and make sure we put in place all the building blocks to make sure that while this technology progresses, we are focused maniacally on making sure society is not left behind, defined as a large portion of society today which feels disenfranchised because they either don't have the educational skills, they don't have access to the education, or they don't have mobility to really go after the jobs that they want. So I think this requires a major rethink that cannot happen just by governments. It's for the first time, I think, we have to take the stakeholder theory a bit seriously and say companies and governments have to sit down and have a dialogue about what's the future for the worker. When you go off and hire a highly technologically savvy worker, what happens to the worker that's left behind? What's the retraining program? What's the relocation program? We have to start talking about this holistically. If we don't, I think we're going to exacerbate this division in society. And I don't think that's a society any of us want.
Thanks very much, Indra, and especially thank you for highlighting this point about taking a stakeholder approach as distinct from the shareholder value, perhaps, approach. This is something that we heard earlier in my colleague David Otter's discussion with Satya Nadella as well. And Satya is really pointing to this importance of thinking about a multi-stakeholder approach. It's really nice to hear this coming from more than one head, a business leader. Yasheng, one of the things that we've noted is that major technological breakthroughs, so AI, advanced automation, and so forth, are raising a host of concerns. These include privacy, trust, transparency, and global competition. I'd love to get your thoughts on how you see these issues being addressed in different places, in particular in China, Europe, and the United States.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for excellent question. I think we are in an unprecedented era of technology developments, but also the institutional and social environments under which technology develops. Right? So if you think back, really this is the first time since the Industrial Revolution that potentially breakthrough technologies can happen in societies that do not share Western norms and Western values on a whole range of things, definitely on politics, but also on social protection, on privacy, right? So the closest parallel I can think of was Soviet Union. But Soviet Union was advancing physics and math, and those breakthroughs didn't really affect, it increased the military capabilities of the Soviet Union, but it really didn't affect the lifestyle of Americans or Western European countries other than through military and defense, right? So Soviet Union didn't have the Soviet equivalent of TikTok, which is a app used by over 100 million Americans, developed by a Chinese company. So it is really for the first time. And I don't know what we should do about that. Trump's response is to stop China, which I don't think is the right policy choice. But this is something we ought to think about, right? Driverless cars, there are many constraints on driverless cars in the United States, not just software and engineering, but also sensor embedded infrastructure, because driverless cars require a sensor embedded environment. China is moving ahead rather substantially in building sensor embedded infrastructure, smart cities, right? So it's not just a behavior data, facial recognition, but also traffic data, infrastructure data. So, I'm not making a prediction, but the possibility is that China may come up with the next generation of driverless cars. And so we can't think about these things in isolation of what's happening in other societies. I'm more familiar with China than with other countries, in part because China is more advanced in this. Things can happen in India, things can happen in Brazil. So we need to have a more holistic view. Maybe we don't get to make choices on our own. Maybe we will be given a product, a choice. Then what do we do? So I'm posing this question for us to think about.
Thanks very much, Yasheng. And I wonder if I might just pick up on this question and turn it to Volkmar and sort of get your perspective, or maybe more broadly, the perspective on these questions of China and competition from Germany. A lot of, I think, the discourse in sort of the global business has been this kind of US-China sort of tension. But of course, it would be really insightful to get a sense of how these things are being considered, these questions of technology and competition in Germany, especially given Germany's manufacturing, sort of global manufacturing dominance.
Of course, the rising tensions between the US and China is a big concern to us in Europe and in Germany, and maybe we can discuss a little bit on this later on. But maybe I can start with one aspect that Yasheng also mentioned briefly regarding AI and what our approach is. And I think it's a little bit typical, at least for the company that I'm responsible for, and a little bit maybe also how we view things in Europe. Because in our journey using AI for industrial products, we very soon gave us a code of ethics. And Bosch is also part of the European community activities to formulate such a code of ethics for AI. In fact, we are also applying some of the principles that are discussed in Europe in a pilot phase. And I think this is the way how we shape this new technology. So, for example, we say that, first of all, the human being always has to be the last instance, so to say, that you can address to. AI has to be safe, robust, and trustworthy. These are principles that we obey also in developing our products. Just to give you one example, and that also addresses what Yasheng mentioned regarding automated vehicles, where, of course, Bosch is also heavily active. In Europe, we have the opinion that in a dilemma situation where an automated car based on AI has to make a decision without a human intervention, it's not allowed that you make any kind of assessment of the life of a human being. So there is no possibility for a software engineer to assess the value, let's say, of the life of a child versus an elderly person. It's simply not allowed. This is one ethical principle, for example, that you can use in solving these dilemma situations and hand it over basically to society and say, what's the appropriate system reaction of an automated car in such a situation? It's not up to the engineer. And therefore, I think this concept to think about the impacts of technology very early and start a discussion in society. What do we really want and what has to be excluded? I think is a big advantage that we have in democratic societies that we should use and must use.
Thanks very much, Volkmar, and thanks for the example. I mean, so the question of the valuation of life in the programming of autonomous vehicles is crucial. I mean, this is the trolley problem, which many people often pose, and that's the way it's really been thought about in the U.S. This is in many discussions, many ethical discussions or ethics discussions, as a real trade-off that one has to think about. And so it's really nice to get this perspective from Germany, where that really puts it to the side. So sort of turning to Indra and sort of staying at the societal level, Indra, I'd love to get your thoughts on the following. We've seen how capitalism varies across countries in the institutions, and as Yasheng noted, for example, in some of the values that it holds. We were wondering, given the fact that we're seeing new technologies emerging in many different contexts, what kinds of reforms do you think are necessary in order for us to promote the best of capitalism? That is, the kinds of technological innovations and creativity that capitalism facilitates, while constraining its most troubling features, in particular income inequality.
Jason, I tell you, I don't think we should constrain technological progress because it is a competitive advantage of nations. And I think we have to let innovation thrive. We have to let technology proceed. At best, what we can do is anticipate the negative consequences of technology, whether it's data privacy or whether it does some things to foster, trouble in societies. We can anticipate those and put in some checks and balances. But beyond that, I don't think we can really constrain technology, because if you constrain it in the US, some other country is going to win. So you're going to have to keep this race going. But what we can address is the negative effects of technology. But then it starts with this idea of what kind of a society we want. We cannot let everything fall to companies, and companies cannot punt everything to governments. It just can't happen. So I think there's got to be a real discussion on what kind of a society we want. See, the problem is in the past, there's always been technology changes. But for many, many decades, we had shifts within mechanical industries, so the workers could move from industry to industry. Then when the first change happened and started to go into the electronics world, you saw the first displacement. And then now that it's coming to artificial intelligence, more software driven, you're beginning to see a lot more displacement and workers who cannot be retrained for the new world. At the same time, there are lots of jobs that are available, but the workers don't want to do it because it's in a completely different area than they used to working. For example, there's a lot of caregiving jobs. but you can't retool a factory worker to be a caregiver. So I think we have to sit down and think about the future of technology and the future of societies together. So if people are going to be displaced, what are we going to do with them? How many of them can be retrained? How many cannot be retrained? In which case, what kind of a life do we want them to have? How are we going to handle them? I think it requires a really careful discussion on how do we make sure we don't leave a big swath of society on the side. I'll tell you one thing, when Pepsico, when we were doing productivity programs, there was one of the waves of productivity where workers got displaced. We set up a retraining fund and said, let's make sure that the workers who are being displaced can access this retraining fund. But what we did not anticipate is it's not just enough to set up a retraining fund. We've got to ask ourselves, what jobs are we retraining for? The money is not enough. We have to direct the people. But then are people educated in high school or in college with enough core skills to even go through the retraining? That's the first part. The point two is mobility. You know, when you have working couples or people who don't have much equity in their homes because the value of real estate has come down in manufacturing towns, how can they up and move to a new town? So I think we have to think about this as a systems problem and really start with, do we really have a feeling that we've got to improve the structure of society from where it is today? We should stop talking about averages. We should talk about disaggregating the very wealthy and their incomes and the working class and their incomes and say, look, this kind of dichotomy in income levels cannot continue. If we start with that great consciousness, I think we'll come to a very different answer, Jason.
Great. Thank you so much, Indra. So going to a question that's come in from our audience, and Yasheng, I think maybe I'll put this one to you. The question is the following from Joel Bell. New technologies seem prone to markets as well as political power. Antitrust has ambivalent support. I'm assuming they mean antitrust, so monopoly policy or anti-monopoly policy in the United States has ambivalent support. Regulation is not trusted. How can we address this?
Yeah. So aside from these technological issues we're discussing, an additional challenge for our society is the deep political divide that we're seeing in the past 4 years and in the recent election. On antitrust, there is a divide between the two political parties among different stakeholders about the economic and the political rationale of pursuing antitrust policies. It is very interesting if you look at the sort of the intellectual underpinnings of extreme right-wing economic and political ideas. In this country, there is a battle and between these two ideas, and one party represents the extreme version of the right-wing authoritarian ideology, and the other party, I think, represents a moderate version of the middle of the ground views. It is interesting if you expand this kind of intellectual horizon to countries other than the United States. Mm-hmm. You notice the following. The most extreme right-wing intellectual ideas tend to come from former communist countries. Mm. Many Chinese intellectuals have a die-hard right-wing ideas about economics, about politics. They would dismiss the whole discussion we're having now about ethics and optimization of the value of human being. To them, this is a no-brainer. Why are you talking about these things? Of course, the value of two persons and the value of a young person is bigger than the value of an old person, of one person. To them, this is taken for granted. If you look at the Eastern European countries, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, have very, very powerful right-wing laissez-faire supporters. East Germany has many, many conservative politicians. And so we need to pay attention to that. The debate that we're having now is no longer confined to the campuses of MIT, Harvard, or Stanford. It is a global debate, right? Antitrust policies in China, in Asia, is going to be affected by the intellectual trend. You may see the downfall of the right-wing ideology in this country, hopefully, but you're going to see a rise of the same ideology elsewhere in the world. And that has implications, not just for antitrust, but for really human-centered technological development. You know, in many conferences and discussions I have had in China about AI, there's almost no attention to the issues we are talking about. Human costs, displacement, human-centered AI, very few discussions. Only very recently, some AI companies in China are talking about this, but mostly as a PR issue rather than something that is dear to their heart.
Thanks, Yasheng. I wonder,
By the way, let me just say, I'm not passing a moral judgment. I'm just pointing out a fact. I'm not saying that's bad or that's good. I'm just saying that as a matter of fact, that's what I have observed.
No, thanks, and thanks for the qualifier as well, simply because it helps me to put the question also to Indra and to Volkmar, which is that, you know, what do you observe in other countries? And again, both of you have huge experience in doing business in many different country contexts. I mean, how do you see some of the issues that Yasheng just described playing out in different places?
I'll let, go ahead.
Well, I only can support fully what Indra, what you said earlier. For me, it's all centered about the inequality of societies we want to accept, or how we move things into a certain direction. And if you look at what has happened in the world, we see clearly countries that are leading in technology, like the US, but still, and that was demonstrated very clearly in the MIT report, had a huge rise in inequality. And Yasheng also pointed to some of the political issues in countries where, if you dig deeper, mostly this is the cause for this, for the right-wing parties, for example, that people think they have been left behind and that the inequality has increased over the years. And that's something I can only fully support from the bottom of my heart. We have to care about this, not ignore it.
And in a way, Jason, I think COVID has exacerbated the issue because, you know, people who were our frontline workers, who we rebranded essential workers, kept the economy going, but, you know, we're not really doing anything extra for them. And they're the people that didn't have access to great education, didn't have broadband access. Many of those families didn't have, you know, devices in order to have remote education. They don't have role models to teach them. So in many ways, COVID has exacerbated all these societal divides. So I think more so than ever, we need to have this discussion and dialogue now. Now, let me tell you what I'm observing in many countries. Many countries are beginning to talk about the fact that corporations have to step up. You've got to have a stakeholder approach. You can't simply pass costs on to society. We are not asking companies to become governments. All that we're saying is, we want you to create jobs, we want you to grow, but don't pass costs on to society. That's really what we're saying. And so many countries are now saying, take a portion of your profits and put it aside for retraining programs or social programs. Many countries are insisting on a stakeholder theory. But I think right now it's all about dollars and sort of spreading it around. I think we need a very concerted piece of work to talk about how are we going to address this extreme inequality that's resulted because of so many factors that's happened over the last 2 decades. But at some point, we've got to stop and have the discussion and do the right interventions. Do the right interventions. I mean, you've laid some of them out in the report, but it's time to do something about it. I mean, I like the fact you talked about taking the workers seriously, giving them the right support systems, the right, minimum wage, whatever benefits you give them, where we stand versus many of the other countries. I think it's time to start putting that all in focus and saying, why can't capitalism and care for the workers go together? Why is it one or the other? I think that's a fool's choice. And that's really the discussion we're going to have together as corporations and governments.
Thanks very much, Indra. So just continuing with questions that are coming in from our audience, and one that I think follows on directly on your comments coming from Dylan Terrell. How much responsibility falls on tech companies, or I would say companies more broadly, though Dylan framed this in terms of tech companies, how much responsibility falls on companies that are replacing jobs to also replace those jobs themselves versus expecting the government or other firms to step in? Indra, maybe I could ask you to if you have any thoughts to share that, because I think it follows on some of the remarks you're just making.
Well, there are tech companies and there are tech companies, okay? I sit on the board of a tech company, Amazon, that's one of the largest job creators right now. One of the largest job creators, investing so much capital expenditure in the country to expand, build new distribution centers, but also hiring and also treating workers right, with minimum wage of $15, all the benefits, giving them opportunities to get retrained. So I feel fortunate to serve on the board of Amazon. Other tech companies are growing, but they're adding higher skilled workers. And some of that might be causing job displacement. That's, I think, part of natural evolution. Again, I come back, Jason, I don't think we should sit down and talk about how to clip their wings. That's a very bad outcome for a nation that's looking to be the most innovative, the most inventive, and perhaps, the beacon of innovation in the future. You shouldn't clip the wings. I think we ought to have a different conversation about what do we do with the displaced population. I think that's a conversation which is long overdue. It's not just because of the big fangs. It's long overdue because for many, many years, we have underinvested in those societies. And I think it's time we had a discussion about that, independent of the technology discussion.
Great, thank you so much. Volkmar, turning to you, there's a question that came in from the audience that was directed towards you from Christina Fisher. The question is the following. Earlier in the virtual meeting, I'm not sure if you caught this part of the meeting earlier, but earlier in the virtual meeting, one presenter said that Germany was not making the most of technology. And I think the discussion earlier was new technological innovation. So technologies at the frontier in its economy. And so potentially was falling behind in these cutting edge technologies. So the question is, do you agree with that conclusion?
Well, of course, leading a technology company, I cannot agree. That's very clear. But I can also justify. I mean, for example, the company I'm responsible for, Bosch, has about 400,000 employees, and 70,000 of them are in R&D. But if we try to answer this question, of course, we have to be more precise and look at the different technologies in detail. Now, for example, let's take AI, because we discussed this earlier. Our approach is what we call industrial AI within Bosch, but also within, I would say, Europe. And industrial AI means we combine artificial intelligence with the domain knowledge that we have in our products. And we are leading in this field. It's not some of the IT tech companies that are leading there. And that's the way how you can be in a leading position, combining your traditional strength that in this case come from the product side and combine the new technologies. So I think definitely it's possible. Of course, it's very clear that the typical, I would say, European and maybe even more German attitude is a very self-critical one, which on the one hand side is very good because it is some kind of protective shield. But on the other hand, it sometimes also indicates we are falling behind. So for example, regarding electric mobility, if you look at the facts at the moment, electric mobility is booming in Germany. And I make the prediction because as a supplier, of course, I'm not only serving German OEMs, but also Chinese and US, you will see a situation where we will not fall back. We will be in a leading position regarding electric mobility, I promise you. Although everybody has been very critical regarding this issue, are we falling back behind the competition? I can only tell you we are the largest provider of electric mobility components in our field in China, which is the largest market for electric vehicles still now.
Great. Thank you so much. So kind of building on this point and also kind of hearkening back to the previous panel, which focused on skills, with another question that came in from our audience. The question is the following. It was said today, so earlier, that there's a war for talent. Isn't it true that globally, is that true globally? And how does that worsen the demographic disparities in different countries? So thinking about things like brain drain, for example. Volkmar, maybe I could ask you to if you have any thoughts on that. So to what extent do we see a global war for talent? And how might that be shifting? What sort of implications might that have for the movement of talent across borders?
Well, first of all, I'm of the opinion that the situation with respect to people applying for a job and companies has undergone a fundamental change already many years ago, not across the board, but in some areas already long ago. That's maybe why I changed our philosophy already a couple of years ago, saying that it's not the people that apply for a job at Bosch, it's Bosch that applies at those people. Because I was educated or grew up in microelectronics, and even a long time ago, it was exactly this situation if you are looking for experienced ASIC designers, for example. And this has, of course, been a strong trend if you look at people that are capable in AI or in software and so on. So that's clearly something that where companies have to change their attitude. And if you do these changes, of course, then you have to look for talents not only where you are active, but very often you have to go where the talents are. That's why, for example, we opened up development centers at hotspots where the best capable people are. Decades ago, this would have been impossible. People would have to move to the location of our company. That is long over.
Indra, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this as well?
No, I agree with the comments made because I think there is a shortage of talent in advanced technologies. Any which discipline you look at, there's a finite number of people who are graduating from universities with the right educational qualifications, and everybody is going after them. And at some point, you have to stop poaching for the same people. You're just going to run out of circles. And so I think we're going to have to do two things. One, educate more people on the technologies for the future. I mean, for example, all of the new bio life sciences technologies, we need a whole new caliber of people trained in a different way, which means we've got to go back and rethink high school, middle school education all the way through college and later. Because if you want people who know gene editing and all that stuff, you can't just sort of flick your fingers and they don't show up. You need to build the pipeline. You need to build the teachers. You need to have the right educational tools available to them. So I think that brain drains are happening in some countries. Many Western countries are going and locating where a lot of the talent is, which is great because it avoids the immigration issues that are so much on the front burner. But there's no question that we have an acute shortage of talent. I was looking at the numbers, even in the United States. They said there are 700,000 job openings right now, of which almost 40% is for technical talent. That's a lot of people, okay? And so the only other plug I'd put in here, it's not even a plug, an observation, Jason, is that 70% of our high school valedictorians are women. I think 45% of MIT's engineers are women. 65% of highest performing graduates are women. yet women are not in the workforce in large numbers because of all kinds of other barriers. So if we're really short of people in our workforce, if we provide families and women in particular the appropriate support systems, many of these high-performing people can be brought into the workforce. I don't think we have a choice.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much. No, that's absolutely right. And I think especially highlighting the sort of changing gender composition of talent is hugely important for us to consider. So we are just have about a minute or so left. So I just want to ask one final question and just ask you for a quick 30-second response. So we'll save the most fun question for last. Given sort of taking a step back to our discussion of the interaction of global politics with the global economy, of course, we see a new administration coming in the United States. And so I just want to ask each of you, what advice would you give to the new Biden administration on these issues of technology, jobs, especially from a global perspective? Maybe, Yasheng, maybe I can ask you to start first. Volkmar, then Indra will give you the last word.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Actually, one has to do with the global talent issue. The United States, the way that United States develops its science and technology is because of global flow of talents into this country. And Trump has restricted that flow in the name of hurting China. It's actually hurting the United States. It's also hurting China, but it's also hurting the United States. So I'm working on a book that proposes 4 ways of looking at technology development in terms of 4 kinds of freedoms: personal freedom, exploration freedom, funding freedom, and application freedom. If you look at these 4 freedoms, United States, definitely personal freedom, this is a democracy, property rights protection, exploration freedom, the ability to explore new topics, United States is ahead. But in terms of funding freedom, in terms of application freedom, China arguably is ahead of the United States. So essentially, if you're a talented engineer, you're looking at where you are going to do your best of the work in the next 10 years. The decision is not as straightforward as it was before, when the United States invested very heavily in science and technology, when the companies and universities had a lot of money to invest in science, right? China is increasing its investment. China may attract a lot of the talents if we don't do things right. So my first advice to the Biden administration is, yes, definitely pay attention to national security issues and things like that, espionage, but to have a more complex and nuanced approach toward this question about human capital and talents.
Great, thank you so much. Volkmar, just 30 seconds on your thoughts, your advice to the Biden administration.
Come back to your strengths, which were international, global, I could say, a collaboration, and identify your real friends.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Indra, last word.
I'd say, reinstitute the Office of Technology Assessment so that as technology progresses, we sort of start to look at what the implications of the technology are so we can figure out the appropriate checks and balances to put in place ahead of time. But, encourage technology, celebrate it.
Great. Thank you so very much. And thank you to the 3 of you, Indra, Yasheng, and Volkmar, for your thoughts on this panel. Thanks very much to our participants, and looking forward to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.